Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber, and this is your Amac podcast, Better for America. Today, we have some earth shaking topics to unpack on the Reb and Rob show. And these topics have impact really on all of our lives. Now, at the end of this podcast, we have a little surprise, some cool information to share. But for now, I'm going to hold that, and I'll share that with you folks at the end. So, of course, today we have with us our friend, our national spokesman, Robert or Bobby Charles. And Bobby spends more time on camera than he does writing these days, but he certainly writes a lot for AMAC. If you folks haven't downloaded the AMAC News app, go ahead and do that now. But as a quick recap, Bobby Charles served in the Reagan White House, the Bush 41 White House. He ran a major part of the House Oversight Committee for 5 years under Newt Gingrich. He was a New York and D.C. litigator. He clerked on the U.S. Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit, for a Reagan appointee. And so Bobby knows the law, he knows the politics, he knows the policies, and he really is a true Reagan conservative. I always have a blast when I'm chatting with Bobby, and we learn a lot. More recently, actually, Bobby served also as Assistant Secretary of State under George W. and Colin Powell, and he penned two books, two very good books, taught at government oversight at law at Harvard's Extension School, and of course, he's our national spokesman. So I am just thrilled to have you with us, Bobby. Thanks again for joining us. It's been a while.
It has, and Rebecca, it's always such fun to be on this show and talk about the world, because I think we kind of go right at the biggest issues in the world. So it's always a pleasure.
Bobby, you are also Assistant Secretary of State managing operations in the Middle East and globally. And we're seeing a remarkable turn of events. We see Russia on the Ukraine border with a very large number of troops. And then at the same time, China and Russia announcing a clear anti-Western pact. So let me ask you to unpack some of this for our listeners. You have been in Russia, Eastern Europe, and the Far East. What does the troop deployment on Ukraine's border mean? And what should we expect? And what does this China-Russia pact mean for us in the future of our world?
Great questions. And let me start, Rebecca, by just laying out some of the facts so that everybody understands the sort of closed universe of facts. And then we will go from there to the meaning of it, which is quite consequential. Good word for where we are right now. The facts, those two categories are important sets of facts. On the Ukraine border today, on the eastern and southern border are 175,000 Russian troops. On the northern border, actually Belarus, but Belarus is tightly allied with Russia, are another 30,000. The ones at the north are perhaps 50 miles from Kiev. The ones in the east are probably 100 miles from Kiev. And so when in the last few days, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said the Russians could overrun Ukraine in 70 hours, that's exactly right. The question, of course, on that facts is what are they intending? What are they intending? Why are they doing this? Why are we not responding in a more aggressive way to this? Mean if they do overrun Ukraine? But the second set of facts has to do with that pact just described, which is rather remarkable. I cannot think in my lifetime of a pact announced, certainly not China and Russia. If you go into the details of that pact, it says that they're going to redefine human rights the way that China would like to define them. They are going to cooperate on everything from security and energy to their economies. And essentially, it's a manifesto. It's an anti-Western manifesto. So let's go back to Ukraine and Russia for a minute. What are they doing and why? First thing they're doing is they're very interested in Ukraine because it has geopolitical and strategic benefits to them, but there's a deep historic tie between Russia and Ukraine, and half that country speaks Russian. So there's a strange dichotomy, there's a strange set of events here. They're pushing NATO. They're basically trying to, with pressure on Ukraine, they're trying to get NATO to give up concessions. And we happen to know that on January 26th, Biden wrote a letter to Putin. We don't know what's in that letter. I am concerned that it's an appeasement letter, essentially saying, well, no, don't worry, Ukraine will never join NATO. Don't worry, we will never try to get into your sphere of influence. We shouldn't be saying those things. The truth be told, Ukraine is an independent country. When they gave up their nuclear weapons about 25 years ago, they did so with an assurance from Russia that they would never be invaded. And so, look, should we defend Ukraine with U.S. troops? No, because they're not part of NATO. Should we be defending them by giving them as much defensive capability as possible and telling Russia that they may well be kicked out of the international banking system? and we might reverse our position on Nord Stream 2 if they go in there? Yes, we should be. The problem with this administration, Rebecca, is that they are weak, weak, weak. And then if you flip to the pact, that's just another reflection of how weak they are. Strategically, what that means, that pact means, is when Ukraine is overrun by Russia, which I think in part they will be in the next few weeks, I'm guessing, just because so much of their commercial rail has shifted now to trying to put troops on that border, then China will have their back. And if China goes into Taiwan or the Spratly Islands or some other part of the Far East, Russia will have their back. And remember, they're both members of the Security Council at the United Nations. So it's a very foreboding, sort of forbidding turn of events. And it really reflects the fact that we have a president who seems to be only half there.
And that was really my follow-up question here is what should we have done? What could we have done differently to avoid this major turning point really in history where we're seeing things unfold that, in my opinion, could have been prevented. Your thoughts on what we should be doing differently or could have done differently? Is it too late?
Yes. Well, let's start with the first part and then get to the second part. The truth be told, war is always a failure of diplomacy. So what should have happened is back in the Obama years, and certainly in the early Biden administration, they should have taken the position that both Trump and Reagan took in prior years, and George Herbert Walker Bush, and said, look, there's no advancing on another sovereign country, okay? You live by the rules that we call international law. And if you don't, we will punish you preemptively. We're not going to allow you to just walk all over neighbors. It's like George Herbert Walker Bush said to Iraq, not to walk over Kuwait. We're gonna retrieve that country's sovereignty. But Reagan and Trump really represented the best possible strategy, which is peace through strength. You strengthen your military. You make very clear your signals. You say, look, this line, not like Obama in Syria, where you said, oh, cross this line and it's all over, and they cross the line and you do nothing. Biden, of course, in Afghanistan, telegraphed weakness from the get-go. But what we should have done is we should have sat down with Ukraine, and we could have commanded it to happen, sit down with some international actors, the Western European countries, maybe the Eastern European countries, Russia and Ukraine, and said, look, Russia, you want a corridor to a warm water port. That is a traditional requirement that you have. You want elevated trade, and you want some kind of assurance that NATO is not going to ever sweep in and take Ukraine or bother you from the East, okay? Let's put in writing an accord. We'll call it the Russia, Eastern Europe, America Accord, whatever you want to call it. And we will make clear that if there are economic benefits that should accrue to Ukraine, they will get them. If you want a corridor to the warm water port in the Crimea, you will get that. And you work through the diplomatic process. Unfortunately, the Obama administration previously and the Biden administration now have no clue how to do diplomacy. That's obvious. They've screwed it up with China. They've screwed it up with the Middle East. They've screwed it up with Iran. They've screwed it up with Afghanistan. And now they're about to screw it up with Ukraine.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Joe Biden has got a very weak hand, and he's showing it to the world. And there could have been, I think, just such to understand really what it is that's at the heart of Russia's wish list, I guess, is important. And it seems that he's just going about it all the wrong way, because there's got to be some, like you said, diplomacy, negotiation, consensus among these nations to avoid, a third world war is really what we're looking at. If things continue in the same vein and we don't really assert ourselves. So thank you, Bobby. Bobby, you're writing so much. You span the gamut of domestic and international issues. Folks really should check out our website. We've got some really great articles up there now. I do want to ask you to help us understand the importance of a recent event that's happening across our northern border and spreading around the world. Boy, are people talking about that even here at Amac. This is the massive truckers' rally or protest or movement to stop the government overreach, to stop really the COVID restrictions in Canada. That's what this is really about. What do you think that this means, and how do you interpret this drive for freedom in our northern neighborhood? Because we're hearing across mainstream media that these folks are terrorists, or they're likening them to Nazis, so to speak. And we know that that's not quite the case. So unpack this for a little bit. Is there any precedent for this kind of movement? And is it positive or negative in your view, in the grand scheme of things?
Well, I guess the way I'll start is saying, how great is it when you see freedom afoot and really spreading its wings and going out there and people really elevating their own individual rights in a way that collectively demonstrates that we are a people that empower our government. We don't work for our government. Our government works for us. Same thing in Canada. Same thing around the world, by the way, with these trucker protests. And yes, there is a precedent. But before I get to that, let me say the way I read this is that this is sort of a what I'll call common sense conservative activism taking it to the streets, and it's not violent. It's actually very everything I've seen on all the clips is it's being done with a great deal of good cheer, but it's being done in a way that says, do not think you as a government are going to be able to tell us how we're going to raise our kids. Don't tell us how we're going to keep ourselves safe. Don't tell us that you are in charge, because we, the people, are in charge. And that's what's happening in Canada. It's happening in Great Britain. It's happening in New Zealand. It's happening all over the world. And it's happening at our northern border. And there absolutely is a precedent for this. In fact, there's even a precedent right here in the United States. Through the course of our history, we have had large numbers of people pour into Washington and pour into locations where protest is needed. And the one that comes to my mind is the farmers who poured into Washington on tractors in 1979, actually about 38 years ago this month. And in the middle of a snowstorm, thousands and thousands of tractors and trucks saying, in effect, you can't take away from us the power of the farmer. And it had a bunch of things associated with that. But the reality on this is that, yeah, citizen activism in the name of freedom is a beautiful thing. I mean, to my view, it's a beautiful thing. You're seeing the spirit of liberty rise up like a bubble in the water and surface and say, hey, we're in charge here. You're not in charge. The government is not in charge. The people are in charge. And so I imagine it's going to continue. And by God, it's probably about time.
Bobby, you wrote a piece this week about the thinking of the French historian Alexis de Tocqueville, and it very clearly laid out the difference between government control producing a lowest common denominator kind of equality versus a free people, and democracy creating equal opportunity for all. Bobby, can you help us understand the difference between those ideas and why this matters so much right here in America today?
Absolutely. So, and the point of that piece about de Tocqueville came to the United States in the 1830s. He was a very young man, and he came from France, and he looked around and he said, this American experiment thing, the world has never seen anything like this. This is crazy. These people believe in the combination of liberty and equality. And by equality, he really didn't use the phrase at that time, but what he meant was equality of opportunity. What he meant was, in a world that is free, where everyone has an equal shot at being the best they can be and using God's gifts to their greatest, everything prospers. And this is the 1830s. We were not a giant economy. We were not a giant country, but he predicted it all, really, in a way. And he did the same thing, by the way, in reverse. Even though communism doesn't show up until Marx and Engels, another 30 or some years later, really in its full bloom, he said, there's two kinds of equality. And really what he was describing is equality in a democratic or Republican world, in a free world, and equality in a communist, even though they didn't have communists yet, in a completely government-dominated, centralized world. And he said, the difference is this: equality in a communist or in a dominant, centrally controlled world is the least common denominator. What they do is they want everybody equal at the lowest level. So if we both have a cow, and you're living in the communist world, the natural impulse is to kill your neighbor's cow. Now we're all equal, right? Or if I don't have a cow and you have a cow, the natural sort of this is the joke that they always say. Well, the way that you get to equality is you kill the neighbor's cow. Now everybody's equal, right? In America, we don't look at it that way at all. We look at it as, well, everybody should have cows. And by the way, if you got one, why not five? And if you got five, why not 500? Okay, and that's the way America grew into this unbelievable powerhouse of freedom that animated 200 countries around the world to adopt our Constitution, to come, even though they don't always enforce it the way we would, or allow people to have the liberties that they say they have on paper. Bottom line is, de Tocqueville said, no, this is a juggernaut, this America thing. This is going to go crazy. And the reason is because he wrote these 2 volumes, Democracy in America. The reason is because freedom in context of equality of opportunity is almost an unstoppable force. And so that's the beauty of it. And when you kind of project that into the moment right now, you see that we're really in a contest, a really big contest of ideas between the communist idea, which is that they will define away all human rights. They will define away your liberties. They will essentially vanquish the Bill of Rights and say freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom not to be taken captive by the government, freedom not to be persecuted, freedom to travel wherever you want, freedom to make decisions in your family, in your town, in your state. Well, those don't matter anymore because the government's got that piece of it. We're going to control that. And then the other set of ideas, which is ours over here. And we say, look, no, at the end of the day, every child of God, every human being is a child of God, and they have been given extraordinary capabilities. Their mission is just to find them, and our mission is to get government out of the way so they can find them. So in the grand scheme of things, more government tends to go sideways, and that's why we have inflation right now, massive spending, et cetera, et cetera. But less government gives us all the chance to be who we are destined to be and to find our own destiny.
You know, Bobby, every 5th grade school classroom across America should hear exactly what you said, because every 11 or 12-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid would agree with you when you hear that. It's that simple. Are we better off making our own decisions for our life, our own life choices, or is a body of people labeled as the government better to make the decisions for you? And I think that it's such simple common sense. And when we see what the left is doing, they're trying to wrap all of these ideas in handouts and giveaways, more spending. They never tell you where the money's coming from. They use lies like it's going to cause zero. And people understand that you can't create something from nothing. It's coming from somewhere. It's costing us somewhere. It's costing our nation. It's costing our future generations. And so I love that the idea of really getting our fiscal house in order is also tied to eliminating these programs that are meant to fundamentally change America so that we are a more entitled state or entitlement state, looking for government to take care of us rather than the freedoms that allow us to innovate and create and build and create more jobs. So thank you for sharing that, Bobby. I do want to shift to another cutting edge topic, and it's hitting both Americans and Europeans right now. And it really should be laid right at the Biden White House doorstep. Americans saw a 7% inflation rate in December, and we seem to be witnessing a constant rise in prices and a decline in the value of the dollar. And we're watching this, and it's hurting our seniors. It's hurting AMAC members. We see the price of energy, winter heating and oil, the gas at the pump, all of it constantly rising. The Biden administration seems completely oblivious. They want us to worship the sun, the wind, the sea, as we shut down all pipelines, cut off our energy independence. But of course, we don't do anything about Russia's pipeline, right? That's another crazy way of thinking, which we don't quite understand. Biden is also greenlighting this Nord Stream 2. This is that massive Russian pipeline that causes our allies in Europe to become dependent on Russia. And Biden has not pushed for U.S. exports to offer an alternative. We could, but he's ignored that. What's happening here?
You are so right, Rebecca. I think going back to your 5th graders for a moment, I think any one of them could figure out the right answer here. And Donald Trump gave us the right answer long before today. And the right answer is energy independence for the United States lowers energy prices, and less federal spending lowers inflation. And why do we care about inflation? For the exact reasons you just mentioned. Look, we're all on a paycheck that has only limited. There's only limited dollars in that paycheck. And if you got to go buy groceries and you got to buy gas at the pump for commuting or going to visit family or whatever you do with your car, and you've got to pay for heating oil. Most of New England from Pennsylvania north is dominant in terms of oil, is how they heat their houses. A lot of the Midwest. And so what's happened is it's almost as if they picked all the wrong choices. They had a multiple choice exam and they picked every single one of them was wrong. And so what do they got? They got high energy prices. They got high food prices. Yes, they're killing the older Americans with this Democrat craziness, because you can say, okay, the sun's going to take care of everything, or the wind's going to take care of everything. Well, God bless you. In 100 years, let's just hope that's true. But right now, we got to live, right? We've got to keep people alive. They've got to be able to afford the prescription drugs. They got to be able to afford their groceries. And then you are so right, Rebecca. It's almost as if they gave us two sides of the coin, both of which are wrong. Now they go to Europe and they just put a check mark in the box. They didn't ask anything of Russia. They said, yeah, you want that pipeline? Boom, got it. I mean, I'll tell you, that kind of looks like Russia collusion, doesn't it? I don't know, looks awful like that to me. But then you look at Europe, all of our allies, including Germany, who was just here, the chancellor, they are virtually totally dependent on Russia. And here's the real kicker. Trump was headed down the path of being able to get natural gas that we produce here shipped to the Baltic, shipped to Eastern Europe, so that they would become allied with us in a free market, not dependent in a security way and in an energy way on Russia. What does Russia have to do, let's say, a year from now? I mean, let's just project it out a little bit. A year from now or 2 years from now, when they don't like what Europe's doing, all they have to do is turn the off button on their fuel. And now in the middle of the winter, what's Europe going to do? They don't have the LNG ports that Trump and others would have suggested they have, so that they can ship from and to us. They're dependent. So yeah, you kind of screwed it up in the United States and you screwed it up in Europe. And yeah, if there was a formula for screwing it up, they're following it.
Yeah, I mean, even if you took a multiple choice test blindfolded and you just chose random question answers to your questions, you'd probably get 25% right. I mean, here we've got they've had zero wins, failure after failure after failure. So you begin to think, is this intentional? Is there a concerted effort to weaken America? We've got Americans paying higher prices for gas and oil. We've got European allies that are beholden to Russia. And this is what Biden thinks he's winning on energy policies. He's certainly failing. And I think that everyone sees this. Um, it's going to cost jobs, Bobby. I think it's going to cost jobs. It's going to cost us the loss of our allies.
It is actually already eroding both of those, jobs and allied loyalty. What came to my mind when you just said that, the failure after failure, is that it's really not. I don't think it's really. Again, to some people, China and Russia would certainly like to have us come apart and prove democracy doesn't work and somehow our free economy doesn't work, which it does. But to me, it's almost Charlie Brown and Lucy. I mean, what's happening here? Lucy keeps putting the football down there, and Charlie Brown, Joe Biden, just keeps running, trying to kick in it, and she pulls it out of the way, and he falls down. And this is the problem. Every single time China and Russia set something up, we come dashing in. Biden comes dashing in and flips on his backside. And the problem is, that's our country. That's us. Doing damage to. So, my feeling is we need real leadership. We may not get it in the near term, but we have to keep our eyes on it. And by November, we need to be thinking about, what does it take to stop bad things from happening, even before we can get good things to start happening?
That is a great question. And I want to pause there for a moment. I do want to talk about China and share with you, I think we'll be able to share it up here on the screen, a picture of what's happening in China. In 2015, satellites capture land where we see barren land. Just a few years later, we see that there are structures being built. And then all the way up, I believe, 2021, the latest satellite photo shows this all of these buildings that are being built one after the other in rows, reminiscent of what a concentration camp looks like from the sky. Things are happening in China right now, and I know that you have so much experience. You've been in places like the former Czechoslovakia, former East Germany, former Soviet Union. I want to ask you how you see the rise of communist China. I want to talk to you and get your thoughts. Are we right to be concerned about freedom around the world? And as average Americans, should we be educating ourselves more about really what's happening right now and paying attention to what's happening right now? I think Ronald Reagan did a very good job really articulating communism's threat to free people. And we need to be speaking more on this. I'm concerned, and we see what's happening even with the Olympics there. It just is very unsettling. Your thoughts on China?
Yeah, I think China is the largest, both existential and ideological threat to the United States probably ever. The Soviet Union was an ideologically corrupt, as China is, but it was an ideologically corrupt and generally disintegrating command and control economy, dominated a totalitarian state, which suppressed hundreds of millions of people and killed many in its 70-year existence. But it was really and today, Russia, the sort of the remnant of what was once the Soviet Union, Russia has oil and they have ICBMs, but beyond that, they don't have a whole lot. And so China is a very different kind of threat. China is a robust threat, and in many ways, it's like feeding the neighbor's dog and turning and realizing it turned into a dragon. I mean, what we did starting in the 70s is we started to say, well, no, we'll give you economic advantages. We'll kind of let you cheat a little bit on the WTO, and we'll let you cheat a little bit on currency manipulation, and we'll let you cheat a little bit here on these artificial islands, and it'll be okay because in due time you'll become a democracy. Actually, timeout, wrong. You got that wrong. They did not become a democracy. What they became is a very empowered communist state. And remember, Chinese communism under Mao was actually all modeled on Soviet communism under Stalin and previously Lenin. So it is a direct descendant of the Stalinist model. And when they talk about, well, right now you have millions of Muslim, actually Christians are also persecuted in that country, but you have millions of Muslims in the equivalent of concentration camps. And I say that because they're re-education camps, they're torture camps, they're, go back and look at it. This is genocide. China is globally condemned for genocide. So now you ask, how did this country that's globally condemned for genocide, that is persecuting tens of millions of people, who have imprisoned 1 million people for their religion, how are we having an Olympics over there? And NBC and all these networks are saying, oh, it's just nothing. Don't look behind the curtain. Over here's somebody, skating. The answer is we shouldn't have been doing that. We should have said from the get-go, we're not going to participate. We should have the entire Western world saying we're not going to participate in an Olympics that is held essentially in a totalitarian country dedicated to communist suppression. And by the way, there is a precedent. We should have learned this lesson from 1936. In 1936, the year that Jesse Owens, by the way, won so many medals and basically popped Hitler in the nose with his winnings as an American and as a Black American, we should have understood that if you indulge a totalitarian state, they get stronger. They don't get weaker. What you have to do is confront them head on, which incidentally Ronald Reagan did and Trump did. And that's the way that you tell the world, hey, line up behind our flag. Don't line up behind that flag. Short version.
Very good. Thank you, Bobby. I have just a couple more questions for you, Bobby. I want to switch gears a bit. You've spent time in Taiwan, a free people to whom America has long pledged support. So I do want to ask you first, what is Taiwan like? And then do you see any parallels between what Russia is doing to threaten Ukraine and what communist China is doing to threaten free Taiwan?
Absolutely. And let me start out by saying, if people have not gone to Taiwan, you ought to go. It's an absolutely beautiful country. It is you don't think of it, you think of it as Taipei, which is a city, but it's really this extraordinarily beautiful mountainous, it's like a gigantic national park. It's actually gorgeous. And then you look at Taipei, one of the overarching impressions I had when I got there was, boy, these people are like the living embodiment of America 100 years ago. They love liberty. It's actually safe. They look after each other. They're totally dedicated to the ideals of freedom. And you say, wow, I'm really glad there's a place in the world that's like this. And by the way, just off the coast of communist China. So the short version is Taiwan should be our tightest ally. They are very much like we are. They think like we do. The American Revolution could have happened there, and in effect it did, because that's where the nationalists ended up when they fought the communists, and then they ended up on Taiwan. And in terms of communist China's suppression and increasing threats on Taiwan, similar to the threats on Eastern Europe by Russia, absolutely. They just within the last several weeks, and in fact, over the course of the last several months, they have been repeatedly putting anywhere from 20 to 50 fighter aircraft in Taiwanese airspace, essentially trying to intimidate them. And what should we be doing? We should be saying clearly, by the way, the first call that Donald Trump either took or gave was to Taiwan when he became president. And it sent a huge signal. It said, wow, the United States really does believe in this country and their freedoms. And so, there's this two China policy and all that, but, the way that you maintain freedom is to stand up for it. The way that you lose it is to walk away from it, look away from it, and decide that it doesn't matter.
Thank you, Bobby. I do want to ask you a final question. Usually, when we're doing these things, Bobby, you like to share a story, and I was hoping maybe you could share a story with us uh, about some of your travels through Eastern Europe. Help us understand what have some of these people been through in places like Poland, for example? What do they think? How do they look at America? And how have you experienced some of those interactions with people across the globe?
It's a great question because we live over here. And because we live over here, we don't really have a good idea until you actually get out there and feel it and see it, how they feel about America. What Ronald Reagan once said about us being a city on the hill, being a beacon, it is actually 100% true. Whether you are in Laos or Taiwan or Poland or Czechoslovakia, their newspapers always have stories on America. And the stories on America are based on the idea that, and by the way, in the quiet of the night, they know there is a place. They know is a place in human existence where freedom really exists. The power of that is unbelievable. It empowered the Poles and the Czechs to seek freedom even under the shadow of the Soviet bear. Why? Because they knew America, in effect, had their back ideologically, if not also physically. And, Ronald Reagan went straight into the belly of the beast and delivered a speech in what was then Leningrad, is now St. Petersburg. And he said, there is no legitimacy to communist government. There is no legitimacy. This country, this system will end up on the ash heap of history. And that was like an explosion of freedom in that country. They said, because no one had ever directly confronted them that way. Everybody talked convergence, et cetera. So the Poles in particular, I think of the Poles because I spent a lot of time there during martial law. They, if there was one Pole left, and there was a communist army, they'd pick up their pitchfork and still go after them, okay? That's the way Americans have always been. And that's why the rest of the world looks to us and our love of freedom as a true beacon. So, stories are many, but I'll never forget, I may have said this at one point on our program before, but one of the more moving events was I was there in 1983 and 84, and there were these huge uprisings on behalf of the spirit of freedom, if you will, in Poland, and which at the time was Soviet dominated, in the same way that the Chinese people are dominated today by a communist government. But there was this huge uprising of people, and I thought I heard, because I don't speak Polish, a handful of words. I thought I heard the word Reagan in there, and I thought that's gosh. That's so strange. That's what are they chanting? I mean, thousands and thousands of people as they walked from, as they moved from a Catholic church in Gdansk over to another location. What they told me was, this friend told me, was that they are chanting, and what they were chanting was, Reagan will show you, Reagan will show you, Reagan will show you. And of course, that's exactly what he did. So you see, the power of America defending our own freedom has this ignition. It's like an ignition of a forest fire across the country, across the world. If we believe in our own freedom, there is no country in the world that will give up hope on their own freedom, including China.
When one person is brave, so many other people gain courage. It only takes one person to stand up, to motivate, empower, encourage those around them to do the same. So, I love that Reagan could have left such an important message in the hearts and minds of people across the world. And that message was a word of freedom. Bobby, thank you so much. You have a depth that is so comforting, especially as we think anew about history, American ideals, and how the world really sees America. Not Biden, but America, because we love this country, America. And you do remind us where we come from, what has come before this moment, and how much we all have to be grateful for. So, Bobby, thank you for lifting our spirits and inspiring us and helping us to work each and every day to defend freedom.
It's always a pleasure. I think that we talk about things here that are so easy to forget, Rebecca. And if we can just keep remembering them, then you keep a flame alive through the darkness, and it can ignite the world later.
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone who's listening today. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't downloaded the Amac News app, you can watch, you can listen to this show and track breaking news right from your smartphone. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share wherever you are on social media. And that's right, I forgot. I did tell everyone that I had a special surprise that I promised I'd share with you at the end of this show, that little teaser. So the teaser and the excitement is that Bobby and I will be live at CPAC, the Reb and Rob show, coming to you live from CPAC. I am thrilled because we are going to interview so many conservative thought leaders and just really bright people. We're going to pull them in. They're lined up. We've got interview after interview, so it's going to be a day to remember. Look forward to seeing you all with us on the next show live at CPAC. Please join us. Check our website for details. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here, and God bless you all. Have a great day, everyone.
You're listening to the Better for America podcast, presented by Amac, the Association of Mature American Citizens. To learn more about Amac and all it has to offer, visit us at www.amac.us.